You mentioned the, which we'll talk about in the next couple of days, I think, this new convention from the Council of Europe, the world's first treaty on the right of access to information. And one of the problems in the negotiation between governments that Natasa and I were both involved in during the writing of that convention was that there were some people who don't believe that access to information is a right, and therefore have a very narrow view of it. In Slovenia, it's recognized in the constitution as a right, and your law is able to have that very wide definition because it is seen as a right and therefore applies to all these bodies.
That's why I think, sorry to say that, Helen, that it's very essential that you have FOI in the constitution.
Absolutely.
Where the countries have constitution. Okay, UK is another example because you don't have the constitution, but you do have a Human Rights Act. But if you do have FOI in the Constitution, that means that it is recognized as a human right, so it's in the hierarchy of all the laws, it's on the top, and the country cannot just say that the FOI does not exist, and this is like, it's really necessary to have it as a human right.
I know that all of you agree that the access to information, freedom of information, is a human right.
Yes.
But would you say that it has achieved the status of a fully fledged human right?
Well, I say that in Latin America, or in the Americas, we got some good news on that respect lately. And it's the Inter-American Human Rights Court decided a case against Chile, and applying Article 13, the article that I said before protects freedom of expression, and implicitly, I mean, regards also the protection of freedom of information in the hands of the government. Compel the Chilean government to fulfill with the duty of providing information to a person based on the right to access to information, to freedom of information. So that I would say that is the maximum recognition that we got in the region in terms of this as a human right. And I think this is a very important thing. I'm not saying that these decisions are absolutely followed by our countries. I mean, but it's politically speaking, it's a very, very important step forward.
Well, I think if we look at the map and we talk about these cases that have come up, there's a recent European court case that I would like to ask one of you to talk about at some point. The Council of Europe Convention, it seems like the march is on. But Natasa, what would you say is the most significant achievement in the FOI movement in the past 10 years?
Well, there are many of them, you know, because following the FOI for the last 5 years, in 5 years, I've seen a lot of improvement. For example, we now have 88 countries which do have FOI laws. Do you know how many countries in the world there are altogether? 204. Kosovo is the country number 204, which was recently recognized as an independent one. So we still have a lot to do, yeah? It's a long way up to 204. But 88 is a lot. 5 years ago, when I was appointed as the Information Commission, there were only 62 countries. So, you know, 25 laws in 5 years, that's an enormous number. And the greatest achievement that I see in the last half a year is that we are going to have a first world-binding supranational law ever, which is the Convention of Access to Public Documents. Now, I feel sorry that the convention is below minimum standards that I strongly believe in, but still, I think it's very necessary to move the FOI, freedom of information, to the supranational level, and with this right will be recognized as a human right. Now in some countries, as in Slovenia, for example, it is a human right already, but you can see how European Court of Human Rights is struggling to admit that freedom of information is part of freedom of expression. And just if I have 1 minute of time to explain what I found out, I was studying documents of Council of Europe from 1950s, and I was shocked to see how even Council of Europe at that time was confusing the two words, like freedom of expression and freedom of information. They didn't tell them apart. They thought that this is the same, but today we know it's not the same. Freedom of information is right of accessing public documents. Freedom of information is even more. Freedom of information is active obligation of states to give the information to the public without the need of the public to ask for the information. So this movement is like a virus which is spreading around the world, and I just simply love it. I mean, I'm one of the believers. Maybe I'm biased, but following all that movement, you know, it makes me happy.
I think that there are two levels of successes. One is these achievements where we are, I think, really now in 2009, able to say, yes, we believe this is a right, and we can point to various different, at the national level or at the international level, various different decisions and instruments which support that assertion. And that's a huge achievement by the freedom of information movement. And it really is I mean, this room represents part of it, but it's a huge global movement. I think the other thing, though, just to say on the successes, and maybe we'll come back to this, Susan, is not just the sort of on paper is this recognized as a right, but the fact that people are using this right and getting information which is making a difference at the national level. And I hope that we'll get to talking a bit, I mean, that's part of what this whole event is about, but we shouldn't only focus on the kind of laws on paper. We should focus on how the right is a living right which is being used. So that's just on that point in terms of the successes. We're talking about following the money. We're talking about the exercise of public power. And to the extent that money flows or power is exercised, to really say that the right of access to information is working well, we need to be able to get access to any information, which allows us to do two things. One is to participate. Someone's calling the Information Commissioner. Help, my request has been denied. To say that we've, that it's working and being recognised as a right, we need to be able to participate in decision making before decisions are taken, and to be able to hold governments, public bodies accountable after decisions have been taken, after money has been spent. And I would say that we have not yet fully achieved that in terms of either national laws or the recognition of the right at the national level. That's still a challenge in front of us.
If I may just add something. In our law, we do have a so-called absolute positive exemption, which is saying that everything connected to the spending of public money has to be public. So in the MP's expenses case, like they just right now have it in UK, my decision could never be the decision that my colleague Richard Thomas wrote at that time. If I see that a certain document is connected to a spending of public money, my decision should be reveal the document, and there's no chance that I could decide otherwise. But in many laws around the world, you do not have such absolute positive exemption, and they have to perform a public interest test and all this legal gymnastics, and it makes life quite difficult. But in my case, this is another very good article within our law. Just, I will struggle to keep it there for as long as I'm alive.
Now, Roberto, you've managed to do an incredible amount of work using freedom of information in Argentina, but you don't have a national law.
No. Well, we have a national regulation. I mean, it's a decree issued by the president that applies to the administration, to the federal administration, but it's not a law. And as far as it's not a law, it's a weak piece of legislation. We tried to get a law passed in Argentina, and we have been working from civil society for years, for 4 or 5 years, to get it passed, and we got it this close. So we fail in that respect. So we moved to a different strategy now. We thought that one of the reasons why we fail is that when the law was discussed in Congress, a few NGOs and experts were the only ones concerned about this issue. And we think we need to get as many people as possible. I mean, common people, civil society, all kind of organizations to push for this kind of legislation. And then we started a new strategy. We are not very optimistic about this Congress to pass the law, but we have been working a lot with different NGOs, not NGOs focusing on freedom of information, but NGOs and groups working on gender issues, environmental issues, social rights issues, human rights issues, how to get all these people aware, journalists, that freedom of information is crucial for their own agendas and for their work. So we are trying to expand the demand for information by using this decree, by using the Inter-American Human Rights Court precedents, by using all kinds. We have a lot of legislation at the local level, which is interesting about Argentina. It's a federal country in which municipalities and state governments have passed more legislation on freedom of information than the federal government. So we have a lot of little pieces of legislation all over the place we can use, and we are trying to expand the demand among those who are not enlightened.